In the ashes of a defeated empire, as cities smoldered and borders were redrawn, a quieter operation was already underway. Trains moved through shattered landscapes. Files were stamped, sealed, and buried. Names were changed. Histories were softened. And somewhere between the ruins of Nazi Germany and the dawn of the space age, a moral line quietly blurred. The rockets that would one day lift astronauts toward the moon did not begin in hope. They began in fear, fear of falling behind, fear of a new enemy, fear that knowledge itself might become the most dangerous weapon of all. As the Cold War crept across Europe like a long shadow, the United States faced an unthinkable question. Could the future be secured using the minds that once helped power history's darkest regime? Operation Paperclip was never announced to the public. It was hidden in memoranda, justified in whispers, and sanitized for history books. Yet its consequences would ripple far beyond military laboratories. They would shape global power, redefine scientific ambition, and leave behind an uncomfortable truth buried beneath the triumph of moon landings and rocket launches. Across the Atlantic, Soviet officials watched nervously as German scientists disappeared westward. In Europe, survivors of the war looked on with disbelief, struggling to reconcile justice with expediency. And in America, the public celebrated technological miracles without knowing the full cost of the knowledge that made them possible. Could the greatest scientific achievements of the 20th century have been built on moral compromise? And if so, what does that say about how nations choose survival over conscience? If stories like this fascinate you, subscribe to join us as we uncover hidden global truths. And tell us, where are you watching from? Could decisions like this happen in your country too? The war ended loudly, but its aftermath unfolded in silence. In the spring of 1945, as Allied forces swept across a collapsing Germany, they were not only seizing cities and surrendering soldiers. They were racing for something far less visible: knowledge. Deep inside abandoned laboratories, mountain tunnels, and bombed-out research centers lay blueprints, formulas, and half-finished machines that hinted at a future no one fully understood yet. American intelligence officers moved quickly, sometimes ahead of their own advancing armies. They combed through filing cabinets while the ink was still fresh, interrogated engineers before the dust had settled, and marked certain names with paperclips, a quiet signal that these men were not to be treated like ordinary prisoners of war. Defeat, it turned out, had become a commodity. At the center of this scramble was rocketry. Germany's V-2 rocket had done something no weapon ever had before: it touched the edge of space. For U.S. military planners, the implications were staggering. If these engineers could build missiles that crossed borders in minutes, what could they do under American funding, American protection, and American direction? But there was a problem no memo could fully erase. Many of these scientists were not neutral academics trapped by circumstance. Some had worn Nazi uniforms. Others had benefited from a system built on terror and coercion. Their work was inseparable from a regime responsible for unprecedented crimes. And yet, as relations with the Soviet Union deteriorated almost overnight, moral clarity began to feel like a luxury. Across Europe, rumors spread quickly. Soviet commanders grew suspicious as key personnel vanished from occupied zones. French and British officials questioned why certain war crimes investigations stalled without explanation. Even some American officers hesitated, exchanging uneasy glances as orders came down from above. The future was arriving faster than justice could keep up, and someone was about to decide which one mattered more. By late 1945, the operation had taken on a rhythm both methodical and unsettling. Trucks carried engineers through snowy forests to secret airfields. Families traveled quietly behind barbed fences. Documents were stamped top secret, sometimes before anyone fully understood the implications of what they contained. Every movement was calculated, every decision justified by the looming specter of the Soviet threat. In this quiet logistical ballet, morality became an invisible casualty. The United States was building more than rockets. It was building a future tethered to compromise. Laboratories in Huntsville, Alabama, and White Sands, New Mexico, became islands of German intellect transplanted onto American soil. Von Braun walked through these facilities like a conductor among instruments, shaping trajectories that would one day pierce the atmosphere, and symbolically, the conscience of the nation. Yet whispers of unease followed the newcomers. Journalists puzzled over their backgrounds, colleagues hesitated to collaborate openly, and local communities felt the subtle tension of harboring men once associated with atrocities. In Europe, survivors and historians exchanged grim predictions. Could technological genius ever truly be separated from its origins? Meanwhile, intelligence networks in Moscow tracked every transfer. Analysts in the Kremlin noted the sudden reallocation of scientists with a mix of alarm and calculation. If the United States could harness these minds, what did that mean for the global balance of power? And if the Soviets failed to secure comparable expertise, would the Cold War tilt irrevocably before it had even begun? In those months, the foundations of the space race were being quietly laid, amid unspoken ethical compromises and a geopolitical chessboard that extended from the ruins of Germany to the laboratories of the New World. Each rocket blueprint, each hand-picked engineer, was a move in a game that would decide not only the moon but the moral questions left in the shadows of victory. The stage was set for escalation. The lines between innovation and morality, progress and complicity, would soon be tested on a global scale. By the early 1950s, the quiet extraction of German talent had transformed into a full-fledged race for supremacy. The Cold War was no longer just a war of words, it was a war of capabilities. Across laboratories in Huntsville and Cape Canaveral, rockets grew taller, more powerful, their designs whispering of both promise and peril. Each test launch sent tremors across continents, signaling that the United States was no longer merely rebuilding, it was leapfrogging into the future. In Washington, military strategists pored over reports with a mix of awe and anxiety. Von Braun's team could now design rockets capable of carrying satellites, nuclear warheads, or human beings into space. Every trajectory plotted in the desert laboratories carried the weight of global consequence. Analysts in Europe observed with a mixture of fascination and moral disquiet. For them, the engineers' pasts were not easily erased. Across the Iron Curtain, Soviet leaders moved quickly. Their own programs, often improvised and under-resourced, raced to keep pace. German engineers, once instruments of Nazi terror, had inadvertently become pawns in a new kind of warfare, one fought not just with guns, but with intellect. Moscow feared that each American launch widened a technological gap that could never be closed. Meanwhile, the public saw only triumph. Headlines celebrated satellite milestones and scientific breakthroughs, but few knew the origins of the minds behind them. Even families of survivors struggled to reconcile admiration for human ingenuity with the uncomfortable truth that the same hands shaping rockets had once been complicit in unimaginable atrocities. Could a nation truly achieve greatness on foundations built from the darkest corners of human history? And yet, as tensions mounted, subtle cracks appeared. Some scientists whispered privately about their past actions, some questioned the ethics of their work under a new flag. Others remained focused purely on engineering perfection, as if moral questions were irrelevant to the physics of propulsion. The collision of ideals and ambition was inevitable, and the world would soon witness the first sparks of that tension igniting a global spectacle. By 1957, the competition had reached a fever pitch. The Soviet Union launched Sputnik, the first artificial satellite, sending shockwaves across the globe. In classrooms from New York to London, children stared at the night sky, unaware that behind the scenes, former Nazi engineers were accelerating America's response. Huntsville became a hive of activity, a place where history, ambition, and moral ambiguity collided in every blueprint, calculation, and test launch. International reactions were immediate and profound. European leaders watched uneasily, realizing that the very same scientists who had once built weapons of terror were now architects of the space age. Diplomats in Paris and Berlin exchanged coded concerns, their conversations tinged with both admiration and unease. In Moscow, analysts grimaced over intelligence reports. Their own program had been forced to improvise, lagging behind men whose brilliance had been tainted by complicity. The U.S. government faced its own delicate balancing act. Von Braun and his colleagues were hailed as heroes in the press, yet internally, officials grappled with the uneasy truth. Their meteoric contributions were inseparable from morally compromised pasts. Ethics had been deferred, rationalized by strategic necessity. But across the Atlantic, survivors and historians asked questions that could not be silenced. How much could humanity tolerate in the name of progress? Even the rockets themselves seemed to carry the weight of history. Each launch into the upper atmosphere was not just a scientific milestone. It was a reminder that knowledge, once weaponized, could never be disentangled from the hands that wielded it. The Cold War's stakes had been raised. The space race transformed into both a scientific marvel and a moral reckoning. Every orbit, every countdown, every televised broadcast became a testament to ambition, genius, and compromise. The world had entered a new era, one where the triumphs of humanity were inseparable from the shadows of its past. By 1969, the world held its breath as Apollo 11 prepared to land on the moon. Neil Armstrong's first steps were broadcast across continents, hailed as the pinnacle of human achievement. Yet beneath the celebration lay an uncomfortable truth: the foundations of this triumph were entwined with a morally complex legacy. Wernher von Braun and his team, once instruments of a horrific regime, had now become the architects of humanity's greatest leap. Across Europe, survivors of the war watched with quiet ambivalence. Some marveled at the ingenuity, others wrestled with unease. The same minds that had built terror were now celebrated for exploration. In the United States, historians debated, journalists probed, but the public largely embraced wonder over reflection. For citizens around the globe, the moon landing was a shared moment of awe, but few considered the shadows that had propelled the rocket skyward. And yet, the story of Operation Paperclip was not merely one of moral compromise. It was a story of human complexity. Individuals capable of both destruction and creation were woven into the fabric of modern science. Their brilliance had propelled humanity into space, even as the cost of that brilliance remained partially invisible, a lingering question in the minds of those who understood the full history. The moon, in its silent orbit, became both a symbol of triumph and a mirror of human contradictions, proof that progress can be achieved, but rarely without shadows. As Armstrong and Aldrin planted the flag on the moon, the world erupted in celebration, yet few paused to reckon with the quiet debts owed to history. The engineers who had once served a tyrannical regime were now enshrined as pioneers, their pasts reframed, partially forgotten, or quietly ignored. Across laboratories worldwide, young scientists studied trajectories, propulsion, and orbital mechanics, inspired by triumph yet unaware of the moral compromises that had paved the way. The legacy of Operation Paperclip stretches far beyond rockets and moon dust. It reflects the uneasy choices nations make when survival, ambition, and ethical boundaries collide. Each decision to recruit, forgive, or conceal shaped not only the trajectory of the space race, but also the moral landscape of modern science. Around the globe, governments, historians, and citizens continue to grapple with the same question: how far is too far in the pursuit of progress? Ultimately, the moon stands as both a testament to human ingenuity and a mirror of our contradictions. Its silence invites reflection, reminding us that every leap forward carries echoes of the past, and that the path to greatness is rarely without compromise. In that quiet light, the story of Operation Paperclip endures, a reminder that progress and conscience are rarely aligned, yet both shape the destiny of humanity. In the silence that follows history's triumphs, the shadows of past choices linger. The rockets that pierced the sky carried not only ambition but the weight of moral compromise. Across borders and generations, Operation Paperclip reminds us that human ingenuity is inseparable from the decisions that shape it, decisions often hidden, contested, and morally complex. And yet, the moon continues to watch silently, a quiet witness to both our greatness and our contradictions. It urges reflection, showing that the pursuit of progress always comes with echoes of the past, and that the story of humanity is never without shadows.